And how is everybody today? This is an unplanned little broadcast. Just got it in my head that with all of the all of the discussion that we have and all the topics into which we get on the show, that we're just a bunch of faces to a lot of people who watch us. I mean, maybe some of you interact with us on Facebook. Maybe some of you have followed us for a little while or something like that. But um, I have found myself that it's a lot easier to understand a person's perspective or what they're trying to communicate to you if you know a bit about that person. Um, you know, you can know just enough to be biased, or you can actually know the person and kind of see their motivation and whatnot. So I wanted to give a bit of a testimony today as to just where I'm coming from. It's very odd. This is a great representation of where I'm coming from. Oh, wow. That is some good stuff. I made this myself. Got a couple of cans of the concentrated apple juice from Hannaford and threw them in a gallon jug, mixed them with like 3.5 cups of sugar, some yeast, and warm water. A week later, I got me some alcoholic delight. Homebrew. Why do I say that that is very indicative of who I am? Well, from day one, I've had to do it all myself, always. My mother was 15 when she had me and gave me up for adoption. And my grandmother fought to get custody of me over a period of, I think, a couple of months. I don't know. I was an infant, so it's hard for me to remember. But she more or less raised me, and that's being generous because I suppose she did the best she could, but she was a single mother with 5 other children who was working a night shift at a factory. And, I mean, I guess when when they were around, when my aunts and uncles were around, it was actually pretty cool and stuff. But they had school, I didn't, and so for the first part of my life, I ended up locked in a room for the vast majority of the time. My grandmother would sleep for upwards of 10 hours a day, and when she got up, she'd be there for a couple of hours, and she'd go to work. When she came home from work, she'd be up for a couple of hours, and then she'd go to bed. And solitude was the order of the day. And I guess when you begin to understand just how much solitude I had for the first 5 years of my life, you can begin to understand some of the challenges that I've had in being social. I have been rather open about this to my closer friends, but I have severe anxiety attacks. I seem at ease around people. I seem like an extrovert, but there are times, and it's even happened on the show, where my hands are getting shaky and I'm a cold sweat, clammy palms, and my vision's kind of blurry, and I'm just really heart flutter. I'm just having a hard time keeping it, and there's no reason for it. Nothing causes it. Sometimes there's a trigger, but it just comes and goes. I've been diagnosed bipolar. I suspect ADHD myself because I have the attention span of a goldfish half the time. But yeah, that solitude, in that room, I can remember it vividly, even though it's been over a year and a half since I've even seen that room. Plenty of books, not many kids' books, but plenty of books. We had plenty of encyclopedias, plenty of nature books, Reader's Digest, condensed novels, National Geographic, all kinds of stuff like that. And even, I guess you could say some kids' books, but the kind of kids' books that we had were like the Five Little Peppers or Heidi, Alice in Wonderland, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Classical stuff. I wasn't exposed to any mush. As a child, I was not exposed to any mush whatsoever. The closest I got to mush was Mr. Rogers' World or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And comparing it to like Barney and Friends today, I think I got the better end of the deal. Which, by the way, Fred Rogers is an amazing man, and I love and respect him so much, and I can't wait to have a good chat with him once I get to heaven and meet him. But so yeah, I watched a lot of 3-2-1 Contact, a lot of Square One, Sesame Street. It was the only channel I got. I had a black and white TV. I apologize for the fragmented nature of my explanation here. I've told the story so many times. It's hard for me to remember that I'm drawing a very incomplete picture. But in that room, it was a small room, north-facing window, so it never got any sun. Trees all around on the outside, so at night the shadows of the trees looked pretty creepy. The TV that I had in the room was black and white, old VHS, VHF, UHF, dial knobs, black and white, and the only channel it got was PBS, which I suppose that's good because it's better to be watching that than like Divorce Court or soap operas or stuff. So books, PBS. Not much for toys. The only toys that I really remember are like my Etch-a-Sketch and my Slinky. At one point, I had a bunch of Matchbox cars. At another point, I had some Legos and stuff. But for the majority of the time, I'm 35 years old, so remembering this is a bit of a challenge. But for the majority of the time, I didn't hardly have any toys. Had some stuffed animals. There was that. So coming into school from there was a rather traumatic experience. When I started in the first grade, I had no social skills. Now, let me rewind. Now, in the midst of all of this solitude, here's one of the ironies of it. My aunts and uncles were all teenagers at the time, and they liked to party. So quite often they'd either go out or they'd have a party at the house. And usually, because they couldn't find a babysitter, I was a part of that. My aunts and my mother were all very pretty women, and they could pretty much have their way in the bars. They knew the owners to the penalty box and the cage. The cage is still open in Lewiston, but the penalty box closed years and years ago. And at the age of 3-4 years old, there I'd be hanging out in a bar while mom's getting drunk. And true story, I'm not making this up. I used to play Ms. Pac-Man, and they bet on how far I'd get and stuff. Same thing with shuffleboard. It was a very interesting childhood. Got to hang out with the Saracens an awful lot. For those of you who don't know what the Saracens are, it's like the East Coast version of the Hells Angels. They're more of a family than a gang, though. Pretty cool people, actually. And so, I was exposed to somewhat adult socialization, but perhaps not in the best of situations. Got to see a lot of fights, got to see a lot of real idiotic drunken behavior. I was around a lot of drug use. Funny little story. I had one of my mother's boyfriends, his parents took a shine to me when I was young, maybe about 4 or 5 years old. Actually, more like 3 or 4. And some weekends, they'd come pick me up and they'd do things with me. Like they used to bring me to Storyland or Santa's Village or Six Gun City. I mean, it was really the only getting out that I got other than the partying stuff. And so one time I was having dinner over at their house. Their names are Dora and Bob Markham. They're pretty much grandparents to me. I absolutely adore them. I was eating macaroni and cheese, and they had put parsley on it, and I was picking the parsley off. And Dora says to me, she's like, "Eric, what are you doing?" And I'm just like, "I'm picking the pot off the macaroni." And so I was exposed to a lot of stuff that probably it probably wouldn't have been so bad if there had been some guidance. I don't think that it's so horrible for kids to see the real side of life as long as they have that good, solid guidance, of which I had none, obviously. So, yeah, I pretty much raised myself, through books, through TV, through having conversations with adults. So when I started school, this kid shit drove me nuts. I could not cope with kids. They were stupid. All of them. They were just so dumb. The things that they liked doing, the way that they talked, they couldn't even talk right. I mean, I had hardly been around any kids at that point other than other family members. And we've always been, I mean, none of us are overly educated, but we're all pretty sharp cookies. You can tell that we got a head on our shoulders and stuff. Probably my family is probably the biggest group of underachievers you'll ever meet. And so, dealing with kids, I mean, going into the first grade, I could multiply and divide. And they're sitting there trying to teach us how to count to 10. It drove me absolutely nuts. On top of that, okay, for the first 2 years, my teachers liked me. You know, I was the bright kid. I was getting straight A's, everything. Third grade, I think it had a lot to do with my biological mother moving back in and having a child, my brother Corey. The dynamic changed a lot at home. She got very, very verbally and psychologically abusive. And when I say psychologically abusive, you have no idea. It's so twisted. I could sit here and talk all day about the crazy making, about the head games and, you know, all the deception and all that stuff. But it really, you know, any outside observer could see that there was a huge level of resentment on her behalf because she had a lot of animosity towards her mother, and her mother was ostensibly raising me. So there was that. B, it's not like I outright rejected her, but I never called her mom. I just wouldn't. It just felt so unnatural. She was never a mother to me. I called my grandmother mom. Why would I call Linda mom? You know, it's just so that always got under her skin. So, you know, not getting any attention at home except for negative attention. I started getting a bit of a wise mouth about me at school. Started smarting off a little bit. Nothing really defiant, just humor at the expense of adults, which I'm sure we've all seen how teachers react to that kid who tries to poke at them. You know, they don't kind of like that so much, especially when the kid is correcting the things that they're teaching that are obviously wrong. My science teachers really hated me, though they all recommended me very highly after school. So don't know what that's all about. My math teachers, they didn't like me so much either. But, well, there was one, Miss Nichols. She was really cool. She was, ironically enough, my mother's softball coach when she was a kid. She was one of the first people who found out about my mother being pregnant when she was 14. So, yeah. So school, no, it wasn't such a good experience for me. They didn't teach me shit. I was educating myself far more than they could ever teach me. In fact, when it got to American history and things, that's when I really, like around the 6th grade, I really started getting like really frustrated with the educational system in general because it was such a one-sided story, leaving out so many crucial details. I mean, textbooks suck. They do. They really do. And it's easy to see that if you just spend a little time digging yourself. I mean, it's indoctrination. And even at that tender age, I could see that. And I hated school. I hated everything about school. To me, school is where intellects go to die. You know, I was a free thinker. I wanted to know about physics. I wanted to know about astronomy. I wanted to know about, psychology and things like that. And when they're teaching astronomy in school, we got books that are 30 years old, outdated, they're saying things that are just obviously wrong. School was always a very frustrating experience to me. Now, there's other dimensions to my experience as a child, because one huge element in my childhood, prior to the age of 12, was my grandfather on my mother's side. He, for most of his life, lived down in West Virginia, but for periods of time he would live up here in Maine. And so when he would come up, he was like, I could say a Southern gospel preacher, evangelist, and all that, but I just cannot possibly convey to you the reality of this man. 6'7", a monster of a man. I mean, a giant. You think I have a deep voice? His voice would shake the room. Very gentle giant, though. He's a very, very loving man, but very short on his temper. You know, you get to be that size, you're not used to people back talking you, and boy, did I back talk a lot. So he's a King James onlyist, dispensationalist. The man loved God more than probably anyone I've ever known in my life. I do believe that he was wrong, but he was sincerely wrong, and I think he was wrong for all the right reasons. He was diligent in his study. He was incessant in his evangelism. but he wasn't obnoxious about it at all. He could strike up a conversation with anybody. He got along with everybody except for his own family. He's a little temperamental with them, but we're a rough bunch anyway. So he would come up and he would bring me to these seriously fundy churches, Baptist, King James Onlyist Baptist churches and stuff. And by the time I was probably 12, I knew all the basics of the Bible according to the King's English. I knew about the atonement and all that stuff, and I actually had a pretty decent grip on the Baptist soteriology, the doctrine of salvation, and the sinner's prayer, and all of that stuff. And I believed it. I loved going to church, not because I enjoyed the church experience itself, but because I loved God, and I thought that this was the way to love God. And when my stepbrothers, I call them my stepbrothers, they're actually my step uncles. My grandfather got married, and so they would come along with him. My stepbrothers, they hated church. They're like, it's so boring. And my response to that was, okay, but it's not for you. You're going there to honor God. Why shouldn't it be a sacrifice? Doesn't that make it more meaningful? And so I enjoyed going to church. I listened intently. I think when it really started, where it really put a worm in my ear was that point where, and I remember it to this day, I couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old. The pastor was giving a sermon on swearing without actually swearing. Can't make this shit up here, okay? The guy was actually saying that saying darn when you stub your toe is just as bad as saying fuck. and on top of that profanity is a blasphemy to God, that it defiles the Christian testimony. I mean, the guy was going off on using words like wow and golly and things like that. Hell, friggin' Opie Taylor talked like that, for crying out loud. And that's when I started thinking, something ain't right here. Something ain't right at all. And it was around that time that a big rift developed between my grandfather and myself. I was coming into my pubescent years, developing a bit of rebelliousness about me. And he had a real upside down way of parenting. He was a big softy to all the kids. Up till the day he died, he was a big softy to all the kids. Little kids could crawl all over him. He wouldn't yell at them. He wouldn't bitch at them or anything. But as they got older, he would just be, I can't even begin to describe how anal he was. Like the way we folded our clothes. It was a way that nobody folds their clothes, by the way. He had a very particular way to do it, and I've never in my life seen anyone else do it that way. Had to be done just right. It was very geometric, mathematical. Like if it was slightly out of square, if there's any wrinkles whatsoever, he'd unfold it all and throw it back on the bed and say, refold it. And he did that for me and my two stepbrothers. And it got to a point where I was like, I don't care. You can't make me. And we got in some fistfights. At the age of 12, I remember this one time, he was taking me to this hill, that was maybe a mile down the road, and I was putting my ski boots on because we were going to go skiing up that hill. And he's like, wait till you get up there to put the ski boots on. And my thought is, there's no place to sit down up there. It's all snow. There's no place to sit down. I need boots on my feet anyway. So I just kept putting my ski boots on. And they had all the big long laces and stuff. So it was taking a minute or two. And he's like, I said, wait till you get up to the hill. And I'm like, I can't wait till I get up to the hill. There's no place to put them on. And he kind of lifted me up because I was sitting down. He kind of lifted me up and put me up against the wall. He's like, boy, I told you, you do what I say. And that's when I drew back my ski boot, and I'm like, just like that. He's like, don't do it. Don't do it. And I'm like, get your fucking hands off me. And he's like, I'll grab you if I want. And I wham right upside his head. I think I hit him like 2 or 3 times before he threw me up the flight of stairs, because we were right at the outside door to the to the front door, and he lived on the 3rd floor. He threw me up, like it was probably about halfway up the stairs I went. And I came back down with a flying Wolverine berserker rage leap. I was infuriated. Of course, there ain't shit you could do. I mean, the guy had to be like 300 pounds, and I was this 12-year-old whelp. I gave him a good run for his money. He had more marks on him than I had on me. But at the end of the day, he threw me in the car, and I'm like, take me the fuck home. He's like, boy, you don't got no choice in the matter. And yeah, he took me home. And after that, things were a little tense between us. We had a couple such incidences, and I mean, I'm not going to deny for 1 second that most of it was provocated by me. I had a smart mouth. What do you expect from a kid who's left to his own devices for the majority of his life, and then suddenly an authority steps in? Who the hell are you to tell me what to do, you know? And so going through my teenage years, excuse me, going through my teenage years, him and I had that riff. We didn't hardly talk at all. And I began hanging out with my other grandfather a lot more. Now, it might sound all violent and crazy and stuff, but it really wasn't that bad with my mother's father. He was sane. He was civil. He had a little bit of a temper, but he didn't tend to get physical with people. And even when he gave us a whooping, I mean, we had to really provoke him before he'd bend us over his knee and give us a whooping with the belt. I mean, my stepbrothers would howl and whine like little girls, and it'd be a cold day in hell before I give them the satisfaction of a single tear. But it's not like we had welts on our backside or anything like that. In fact, the kind of kid that I was, I needed more corporal punishment. One of the reasons why I'm so rebellious as an adult is because I wasn't put in my place properly as a child. And so it's been a continual struggle for me to bridle myself. Whereas I see in so many other family members, they were raised somewhat properly. You know, they were taught respect. They were taught you don't talk back. And now they're successful adults. Me, I got my attitude problem. And so as I started hanging out about the age of 12, I started hanging out with my father's father more often. My biological mother had moved out of the house, so I had a lot more freedom at that point. My grandmother, as long as I wasn't getting into trouble, I could pretty much do whatever I wanted. I mean, hell, at the age of 12, I was biking 6-7 miles into town, Lewiston, there to hang out with the boys. So I had an awful lot of freedom early on, which, again, I want to reiterate, is not a good thing. It's just not a good thing at all. And so hanging out with my father's father, my grandpa, I'll call him, and that's a good way to tell him apart. I always call my other one granddad, my father's father is grandpa. But he was a freaking psycho. You don't love the man like you don't even know. I mean, I would march to the gates of hell and back with that man. But boy, was he freaking nuts. Oh man, this dude, okay. This dude's the dude that one of his daughter's ex-boyfriends comes into the parking lot, and I don't know the full details behind what led up to it, but he just comes out the door, get the fuck off my property, boom, shoots him right in the fucking face. No joke. The dude's blind for the rest of his life. I don't know if he's still alive today. Come there, get the fuck off my property, boom. Didn't even get him a chance to go around. I don't know what he did to earn that, but it must have been something. And so my grandfather was the type of dude. I remember we were camping up at Jackman one weekend, and this girl Jenny was up there with us, and I had a crush on her somewhat, and she would just pick on me. She didn't like me at all. And we just caught some brookies over in the creek that morning, cooked them up on the grill, and had a couple pancakes with them. So as I'm eating my fish and my pancakes, she comes by me and hits my plate and knocks it onto the ground. And I just done caught them fish myself. I mean, there's nothing that tastes better than fish you catch yourself. Oh boy, I was pissed. I couldn't have been more than 13, 14 at the time. I gave her a nice good shove, and she fell over backwards over the fire pit. My grandfather, let me tell you, he gets up off his chair. He's probably about 20 feet from me. He starts marching towards me. He's like, "Don't you ever hit a woman!" He comes right upside my head with a friggin' open hand that feels like a friggin' rock. I mean, I've been hit pretty hard in my life. I've been in a few scraps, but at 13, 14 years of age, my grandfather slapping me upside the head. Now, that was the only time he ever hit me. That was the only time he ever hit me. It was a long time before I put my hands on a woman again. I'll tell you that much right now. I saw stars. I was down. I was on the ground. I was like, oh, and that was it, you know? And that was the beauty of the relationship, is that I didn't have to worry about him giving me a long lecture like I did with my other grandfather. I didn't have to worry about him talking me to death. He just handled it, give me the consequence, and boom, over and done with. We don't talk about it after that. I appreciated that. You know, I really, really very much did appreciate that. And, you know, I learned a lot from that man. I guess more than anything, how to be a man. My other grandfather was pretty much the only real masculine influence in my life to that point. My father was nowhere to be found. I mean, he spent most of his, half of his life in federal prison anyway. So with my grandfather, it was just, yeah, he was a psycho. Yeah, he had a temper, but at the same time, he had a dignity about him. That manly pride. And I'm not talking about hubris. He didn't think the world of himself or anything like that. He actually had a lot of humility to him. But he took pride in himself. He took pride in the work of his hands. He took pride in the way he dealt with people. Yeah, you piss him off, you're going to have the worst enemy you've ever had in your life. But his best friend, George, his best friend at his funeral told this story about this time they were driving around logger roads in Jackman, and they came across the shack out in the middle of nowhere. A couple guys living there, and it was the custom out in the backwoods. You stop, you say hi, and so they did, and guys were like, we'd offer you some coffee, but we don't have any. Offer you something else to drink, but we don't really have anything. So my grandfather, he gave them a few cigarettes and stuff, and they went on their way and went straight back into town Jackman, and he spent every penny he had on him on food, coffee, all of that stuff, brought it to them, and not much of a word about it. And I know my grandfather, he don't take a lot of thanks. He's not that kind of guy. He doesn't like to be recognized for the things he does. If he wants to do something nice, he does it. If people want to pat him on the back, he's like, leave me alone. He's I can't think of any two people that I respect more in this life than my two grandfathers. Now my father's father, the one of whom I was just speaking, the psycho, I was about 16 years old. My girlfriend Cindy picked me up for school, and my buddy Pimble lived right behind my grandfather's house. So on our way to school, Cindy and I stopped there and picked up Pimble. And as he got into the car, he's like, "Dude, I got some bad news for you. Your grandfather died last night." And I'm like, "Dude, don't even kid around with shit like that." He's like, No, I'm not kidding. He had a heart attack." And Cindy was like, "You don't have to go to school if you don't want to." And I'm like, "Just drive, just go." And because not many people knew my grandfather like I did. Not many people were as close to him as I was, and that was my way of both mourning and honoring him by going about my day. And all day, just gritting my teeth at school. I guess that was one of those days where I was kind of glad that I wasn't too popular and not many people liked me, because I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to deal with anything. I didn't even hear half the shit the teachers were saying. It just hurt, but I wasn't going to be a little sissy about it. You deal with your pain. And that was the first time I had ever really had an encounter with death. I mean, my great-grandfather had died years prior, and my great-grandmother as well, but I hardly knew them. This was the closest thing I had to a father, really. and it was so very traumatizing. I think that was the beginning of a period of depression that would last 2, 3 years. My relationship with Cindy went downhill hardcore, became complete chaos. I became very controlling and demanding. She became very brash and, you know, overly affectionate with other guys, I think intentionally. And it's just that relationship came to a crashing disaster. And I pined away over her for like a year. That's when I first started smoking pot. Before then, I was completely against pot. I mean, alcohol was never an issue in my family just because it was just a common thing. People didn't end up getting drunk and turning into drunken idiots in my family. They drank enough that they knew how to conduct themselves, and people were held accountable for their behavior. So I never thought anything of drinking. I actually didn't even really care for drinking back then. If I wanted it, I could get it, but it just wasn't my thing. But I was so depressed. Finally, my buddy Pimble, you know, him and I, well, actually, it was my uncle that found the plant, but we appropriated it. Me and Pimble, we picked up a couple of pot plants off the side of the road, and I went to work at Dairy Queen that day. I was 17. Went to work at Dairy Queen and let the pot plants dry in the sun on the side of the road. Got home that night. Pimble and my cousin Scott, who's more like a brother to me, they had dried it out, broken it up, and made a couple of dry bongs. And they're like, "We're gonna go smoke this in the woods." And I'm like, "All right, let's go." They're like, "You're gonna smoke?" I'm like, "Fuck it, why not?" So I went, and oh yeah, I was hooked right off. A lot of people say you can't get stoned off a leaf. Well, young plants and never having smoked pot before, oh yeah. I at one point I thought that I felt like a moose had run me over. You know, I can't even begin to describe that experience. So it's just funny looking back, thinking about how different it is these days. So yeah, I turned into a total pothead. As soon as I turned 18, I dropped out of school. I was like, screw this shit. I got better things to do. And that was just the beginning of a downward spiral for me. I met this girl named Becky and put her through about 3 years of hell because she was one of those good girls that most guys want to meet when they're like 30 and they've like sowed their wild oats. I met her when I was at the height of my rambunctiousness, and so yeah, I really did put her through hell and back. She was a good girl, you know. She was a virgin before she met me. She was everything that a guy could want in a woman, except for the nagging. I guess she did nag a lot. She was very pretty, but yeah, the nagging. Oh, that's what drove me crazy. But I was a stupid pothead at the time. All I wanted to do was get stoned, and we used to scheme all kinds of different ways to get money to get weed. That was like the only thing we wanted to do. And hers and my relationship kind of ended, but it was like a long, drawn-out ending. I'm sure you know the ones that I'm talking about. Neither one of us wanted to let go, but both of us knew we had to. We weren't the right people for one another. And I broke down one day, and I was like, please just come back to me, please. And she's like, we can't talk anymore. And that was the last I heard from her. I won't go into the gory details, but, you know, it was about a year prior to that I'd gotten in a high-speed chase with the cops. Probably should have mentioned something about that. Yeah, I'd jump back and forth. I'd be a great novelist, but a shitty storyteller. Yeah, I'd lost my license for OUI at one point, and I just kept driving. I got a criminal speeding ticket in between the OUI and when they actually revoked my license. So it was actually suspended twice over. And I was just driving down the road one day, had a car full of friends and my 95 Ford Escort. It was 1998. And that cop pulls up behind me, gets right up to me, and puts his blues on. I'm like, all right, boys, here we go. Drop her in the third and took that race court to hell and back. About a half hour high speed chase, which involves some some attempted New Jersey stops, to which I would there was at one point I pulled the e-brake, pointed the car right back at the cop, and charged him. I'm like, yeah, He'll flinch. He did. He drove off the side. Wham, going off. And I'm not going to lie, okay? I'd be a total liar if I told you that I did not have a blast doing that. That was fun as hell. I would never recommend it to anyone. We're lucky to have lived through it. I would never recommend it to anyone because the consequences afterwards really sucked. I went 4 years without my license, and that's pretty shitty to have on your driving record when it comes to insurance, you know? So, yeah, I'd gotten a high-speed chase. Mine and Becky's relationship ended, and it was February of 99. I remember I was like, screw this civilization shit. Got sick of all my friends. I got sick of all my family. I didn't want to deal with anyone, and what I did is I pitched a tent out in my yard in the middle of February. Had to dig into the snow, and pitched a tent out there. Got a bunch of rugs to put on the bottom so it wouldn't be that cold on the bottom. Got a little electrical space heater, radio, and light. Ran an extension cord out there, and I spent probably a good month, you know, isolating myself, just reading. I'd just go up to the library upstairs next to my room and pick out a new book every day. Read through a lot of Stephen King back then. Super insight into people. Read through a lot of Isaac Asimov, Carl Sagan. It was about that time, I think, where I'm not sure, but I think it was around that time where I had started reading Ravi Zacharias' book, Can Man Live Without God? And it was one day I was out there in my tent. I just got my income tax, and I got an ounce of some dilly weed. And I was just smoking and smoking and smoking, and it wasn't getting me high at all. And I don't know if I can really describe how I felt in that moment. But it's like running from one enemy, you lose them, and pick up another enemy, and eventually you lose them. You know, pot was my way to get away. Pot was my way to escape the enemy of life, I guess. I was always too egotistical to even contemplate suicide. It's just a foreign thought in my mind. But I sure did ask God to take my life a few times. But I just started bawling my eyes out when I was smoking and I couldn't get stoned. I just started bawling my eyes out. I'm like, what's left for me? You know, what is this? What's the point? At 19, I mean, this is 16 years ago. And finally, it was. I don't really know how to characterize it other than to say there was a voice in my head and it was not my own. And that voice said, am I Lord or what? And that's when I realized that I had always accepted Christ as Savior, but I had yet to accept him as Lord. And I got on my knees, said the sinner's prayer, and I was on my way to being super Christian. After that, I threw out all of my paraphernalia, got rid of all my pornography, started dressing nice, you know, going to church. I got really involved in East Auburn Baptist Church. Boy, was that a joke. Got really involved with that place. And for almost a year, I was super Christian. I didn't even cuss, okay? And they had 4 services. I went to all 4 of them. They had a Bible study on Wednesday. They had hymn singing on Sunday nights. Went to all of that stuff, all of it. And it was about the time where I was applying for a job as a camp counselor. The pastor of that church had given me shit plenty of times for not having a job. And a friend of mine said that he knew the director of Camp Good News and that he was pretty sure he could get me a job. So I talked to the director on the phone and everything. He's like, yeah, this sounds really good. I just need a recommendation from your pastor. And so when I went to Roger about that, he was like, okay, I'll do that. And so he's like, well, what does he want to know? I'm like, well, he wants to know if I'm good to work around kids, if I'm stable, if, I'm solid in my faith. And he's like, all right, I'll let him know. And basically, Roger, the pastor of the church, told the camp director that that I just was not the right person for the job, that I wasn't ready for it, that I had a lot of growing to do. Granted, perhaps he was right, okay, but the very least he could have done is had a conversation with me about it and given me the choice to say, you know what, you're right. I'm not going to pursue this any further. Instead, he had to embarrass me. He had to totally embarrass me in front of someone, and I thought that was a real shitty thing to do, and that's when I stopped going to church there. I could bore you with the next 10 years, but basically it was church attendance off and on, off and on. You know, I'd go half a year being super Christian, half a year being a drunken, stoned idiot, you know, spreading my seed across the countryside. And throughout all of that, there's been a doctrinal obsession for myself. Now I can maybe, let me see, how long, I don't even know how long I'm going for. I'm thinking I'm probably about half hour, 45 minutes in. I don't want to go much longer than an hour, but I do want people to have a better understanding of me, because I think that a lot of times people who are like me receive me very well, or people who have had similar experiences get exactly what I'm saying. But a lot of times people who have had very different experiences think I'm saying things that I'm not saying, or think that I feel a certain way when I don't. So anyway, over the next 10 years in my 20s, I read through the Bible, I want to say 5 times, because it was 5 different translations. I had already read through the King James a couple of times when I was younger. But then afterwards, when I came out of the whole King James thing, I'm not going to go into that too much, but James R. White saved my scholastic soul. The King James Only Controversy by James R. White. I highly recommend it. It's heavily footnoted. All the references are there, so it's not just a bunch of rhetoric. If you really want to know about textual criticism and want to understand Bible translations and the principles thereof, definitely check out that book, The King James Only Controversy by James R. White. And so anyway, come out of King James Onlyism, somewhat come out of fundamentalism, you know, was in a bit of a little bit more of a liberal church, but I mean, still a pretty fundamentalist confession of faith, you know, everything Nicaea, Athanasius, you know, Chalcedon, all of that stuff. Just, you know, we had very modern worship in church, had very, you know, almost rock song type stuff, and very casual dress, whereas I grew up going to the suit and tie churches. And in my journey, in my intellectual journey, trying to understand doctrine, like I mentioned before, I read through the New Living Translation, I read through the New American Standard, read through the English Standard, read through the New Revised Standard Version, which, to be fair, I skipped large portions of it because you can only read the genealogies and, you know, the censuses so many times. Your brain turns to mush. I can't remember what the other translation was. It might have been Good News for Modern Man, either that or the Contemporary English Version. So in doing that, I started to realize in these translations, I mean, most Christians today tend to be of the Arminian persuasion, not Armenian. Armenia is a place in Asia Minor. Arminian, after Jacobus Arminius. He was a dude who authored the 5 points of remonstrance, and began the whole remonstrance movement against Calvinism. And most denominations these days are rather Arminian. I mean, American Baptist is almost like a 4-point Arminian. 4-point Arminian. Yes, Arminians have their 5 points as well as the Calvins have their 5 points. It's called remonstrance. But anyway, I digress. I started reading Scripture in a very different way. And so what I started seeing more and more is the sovereignty of God. I started seeing how God doesn't ask permission. I started seeing how God is not only completely in control, but makes it a point to prove just how in control he is. You know, you think about how he interacted through Isaiah to the king, and said, is it not enough that you try man's patience? You need to try God's patience as well. Well, fine, I'll give you a sign. A virgin will bring forth a child. And seeing all these things, I didn't even know what Calvinism was. I had never even heard the word Arminianism. I just started seeing, A, God chose me, I didn't choose him. B, I never seek after God. He's ever winning me over. I'm ever trying to get away from him by that's what sin is, essentially, is departing from God. And his mercy and grace is to win us back, and he's ever winning us over. He's ever pursuing us. I did not choose him. He chose me. But that doesn't make me special. That doesn't mean anything other than God is amazingly gracious and merciful. I began seeing how my every thought was evil, and my every desire was selfish. And yet God was so merciful in the face of that. I started reading about the elect and seeing that through different eyes. And when I finally did come across the 5 points of Calvinism, I was like, yes, that's what I've been reading, except for limited atonement. I wasn't quite there yet. What won me over to limited atonement was in God's intentionality. Does he ever set out to do something that he doesn't accomplish? So that's when I started believing in limited atonement. Now, understand, it would have been such a drastic shortcut if the doctrine of hell hadn't have been translated as it had been, if it hadn't have been taught the way it had been. For fuck's sake, I listened to read the transcript to Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God at the age of 8 friggin' years old. It was deeply ingrained. It's just not there. I've seen that now, but at the time, I'm like, Arminianism can't be true because God is in control, and God, all those who God loves, he's going to save. Not everyone's going to heaven, so God must not love everybody. I mean, the mental gymnastics you have to do when you include a doctrine of eternal conscious torment, it's really wearying. And the moment you let go of that and begin to see it through more of a C.S. Lewis eyes, like The Great Divorce, or George MacDonald's eyes, the more you let go of that, and the more you start to see what it really is, then the whole Arminianism, Calvinism thing seems very silly. It does. It starts seeming very silly and very contrived, and everything falls into place. And it's like, you mean Scripture is able to be understood? You mean I can believe in the perspicuity of Scripture after all? And so I became not only a Calvinist, but a dyed-in-the-wool, hardcore, high Calvinist, supralapsarian, basically meaning that the elect was decreed before the fall, that the fall was a means for the elect to arrive at their ultimate destination through the atonement. And so it was a big shift for me when I went, well, I mean, actually from the very beginning, all of it. When you think starting out King James onlyism, fundamentalism, the legalism, I mean, so legalistic that if you didn't dress in a suit and tie at church, they questioned your salvation. I mean, it was just real hardcore fundy. I mean, when I say fundy, I went to churches in the backwoods of West Virginia. You don't get much more fundy than that. They're so spirited back there, they call them Pentabaptists or Bapticostals, They got the Baptist doctrine, but the Pentecostal spirit. They're crazy, I'm telling you. Great people, though, but crazy. All of that, it's been a steady progression. Now, that's on the theological side. Let me go back to the experiential side. My experience of life has been the people who have caused me the most pain are the people who have loved me the most. I hope you could hear the affection with which I spoke of my grandfathers, talking about Hold on. Go, Gavin. Go. He's all scared of interrupting me. My grandfather's the great affection that I had for both of them. And I mean, my mother's father, he was the only one who ever really exposed me to corporal punishment. And that was the best thing that ever happened in my childhood. Everyone else let me run roughshod over them, and if they got pissed at me, they'd yell and scream. Yelling and screaming at a child, I mean, especially when you're doing it in a demeaning way, I don't think people realize what that does to a person inside. That's far greater violence than ever laying a hand on them. I never had resentment for getting a spanking. I developed so much resentment for my mother and my grandmother that to this day it's hard to let go of it. Hard to let go of the ego crushing that they did. Hard to let go of the humiliation and the constant derogation. And they're still like this to this day. Is one of the reasons why we don't speak. It's like I'd rather get punched in the face any day than get kicked in the heart, because that's where real pain lies. And that's where the real wickedness of suffering lies, is when your heart's sick, when you've been betrayed, when you've been left alone, when you've been used and then cast aside. That is some of the greatest pain and evil that a person can possibly experience. But a good tumble in the rough, I mean, me and my buddies, I mean, we'd get drunk and something would break out. We'd have a little fist fight, and then we'd be all happy afterwards. I mean, it ain't for everybody, but violence isn't always an evil thing. Sometimes guys just need to get it out of their system. You know, it doesn't mean they hate each other. I mean, why do you think we got the UFC? Is that evil? Of course not. I love the UFC. I love watching that. You know, ain't nothing wrong with a good little drunken brawl. And sometimes in the course of life, especially when you live in the more backwater areas of the world like I do, you got to fight to defend yourself. You know, you got to fight to defend someone you love. I'm never going to see that kind of violence. That sort of violence is a bad thing. In fact, the lack of that in our society has made us really soft to the point where we are desperately afraid of confrontation. We can't address things as they need to be addressed because we've lost our spine. When you're afraid of getting punched in the face, okay, a 35-year-old man should not be afraid of getting hit. It's just flesh. That's all it is. But I'm not going to go too far down that. I'm going to draw this to a close pretty much. But, you know, I spent a lot of time in the woods. I spent a lot of time doing some hard jobs. I've been a mason's tender. I've been a roll tender at a printing press. I've done roofing and siding. I've, worked at Dairy Queen. That sucked. Worked at a convenience store overnight. That sucked. Did telemarketing. That really sucked, though I was good at it. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff. I've been through a lot of walks of life. I've rubbed elbows with some seriously rich people. I've lived in luxury. I've lived in squalor. I've had lots of money. I've had none. But it's all been me having to do it myself. It's all been God facilitating, but I have to take those steps. I have to walk. Nobody will do it for me. And that has served me very well in my epistemology because I don't take anyone's words for it. The guest that we had this past week, Brad Jerzak, I want to believe everything he said. I want to believe down to the last detail because the man shows such awesome fruit of the spirit in his life, in his dialogue, in his discourse. The man is oozing with the love of Christ, and I want that, and I want to accept everything about that. But I'm an extreme skeptic, and I weigh stuff. You know, the new apologetics thing has rubbed me the wrong way quite a bit, though not quite as wrong as Drew. But I'm just not ready. I'm just not ready to make a determination on things like that. Just because you get to recognize your own error enough times, you got to realize how ignorant it is to have that much confidence in your current assertions. If I've been wrong in the past, chances are, in fact, I can guarantee it, put some money on it, I'm going to be wrong again. And I'm wrong about something right now. If I knew what it was, well, then I'd change it and I wouldn't be wrong. But that's, the world's built on lies. And God bless you people who have been raised in good families, who have had the truth, who no one lied to you about Santa Claus, no one lied to you about Jesus and hell, no one lied to you about the American president and the goodness of the U.S. government. God bless you people that have lived a life in the absence of lies. I am not one of them. My life has been all about lies. Lies I've told, lies told to me. It's been all deception from start to finish. And I have gotten so fed up with the bullshit. I have gotten so fed up with everybody just always lying. It's everything. You argue with someone about theology, you're going to come across some level of deception. Almost everyone. The people to whom I would say are somewhat immune to that, I think that Justin's pretty honest. I think Justin's honest to a fault. I think he can be a bit obtuse at times, but I think he's severely honest. He doesn't use weighted rhetoric. I think David Michael Gregg is another one who's severely honest. John Zimbrato, I believe, is another one who's traumatically honest, and I appreciate that. If there's very few things that I appreciate more than honesty in a person, the one higher virtue than honesty, in my mind, is loyalty. And if you see my walk of life, if you see the relationships I've had, then you'd understand very much why I see that as the highest human virtue. And in fact, many philosophers and writers throughout the ages have. Dante, for example. That's the reason why Cassius, Brutus, and Judas are all in the three mouths of Satan in the lowest circle of hell, because there is no greater sin than that of treachery, that of being a traitor, of betraying he to whom you are loyal. And so I'm in a very weird place because I don't think I'm agnostic genuinely. I think there are things that can be known. And I go back and forth on this. I think you can know truth, but I don't think that truth can ever be articulated. I think words can point to truth. They're like totems that represent a truth, but the truth itself is in a person's head, not in written or spoken words. And I would even defy that. I would say the truth is not in their head. I would say it's a part of their nous, and it's not a corporeal thing at all. And because I believe that, not only do I believe that truth can be known, I believe that on some level we do know all truth. We've just lost access to that, and so it's more a matter of remembering, and that's where that internal truth detector comes in. So I'm gonna shorten this up a bit. I just wanted everyone to get a glimpse into me, my personality, who I really am. I'm a no bullshit, no nonsense kind of guy. I'm not gonna be a fake faggoty Christian. I'm not gonna do that bullshit. You hear me cuss, you see me drinking, you see me smoking cigarettes. I'm not gonna encourage anyone to do any of these things, but I'm not gonna let anyone tell me not to. It's my life, my choices. It's between God and myself. I think that he's okay with it, to be honest with you. The fundamentalist in me says that I should be perfect, holy, and pure. The rational side of me says, what? Like, that'll happen. I think that everyone needs to live their life in the integrity of their hearts and be who they are, and God will correct you. If you're wrong, God will correct you. God is continually correcting me. I believe. It's not just a matter of understanding. I've often explained to Michelle, it's more of a reality to me than my corporeal experience, than my tactile experience here. It's like I have 1 foot in heaven, 1 foot on earth, but the foot that's in heaven is like way into heaven, and the foot that's on earth is just barely touching on the tiptoes. It's just a greater reality to me. And you can't explain that to someone if they don't experience it themselves. You just can't. It sounds like a delusion. No, it's not. This is the dream. I'm experiencing real life more and more every day by my communion with Christ. I believe, and I know he's real. And I know that he ministers to the hearts of those who love him. And I know that if you are dissident, if you are running away from God, he will catch you. The question is what do you have to go through in order to see him with the proper eyes? For some people, they've distanced themselves so much that they need some serious suffering before they can see that their suffering is self-chosen. And for me, I've needed some suffering. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Without that, I never would have seen, you know, I would love to talk to Johnny Erickson Tata someday. Inspiring woman. She said she wouldn't trade her quadriplegic status for anything in the world because she never would have come to know Christ as deeply as she has, if not for her disability. And that is such a beautiful thing. I don't want to be crippled, but God has spiritually crippled me before. And so, yeah, I'm skeptical. I'm no nonsense. I don't like the bullshit. At the same time, I try to be civil. I'm definitely, I'm not a scholar. I'm not the most educated guy in the world, but I'm no dummy either. And I can follow most things pretty well. And it is my goal in this show, in this this endeavor that a lot of people are helping me with, is my goal to be real and to invoke the realness of God's movement here on earth. Invoke the realness of the community between Christians who can accept each other. Just I don't even know how to say it. I want people to drop the vendettas against competing philosophies and dialogue. Discuss the differences, where you agree, where you disagree. I want people to realize relationship is primary. Everything else is secondary. And we can agree to disagree. I mean, look at the people on this show. We are a very diverse cross section of people. And I feel very close to all of you guys, you know, Daniel, David, Matthew, Justin, John, Eric. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone. I'll even include Haley into that one, you know, even though she's hardly on the show at all. It's like we all disagree so much, and yet we have such affection for one another. That's what I want to bring to the world, is that ability. My baby's upset with me, so I'm going to have to get going. But thanks for tolerating my inanities for however long it took, and hopefully you know me a little better after this. I encourage all the other guys that are part of the Wandering Pilgrims, if you want, definitely upload a personal video testimony. I would love to hear it, and I'm sure that many other people would too. God bless and have a great week. See you guys on Sunday.